video explaining why I think I'm an INFJ, and also just kind of what that looks like from my own understanding. It's going to contain a few terms that people may not be familiar with, depending on, I guess you could say, which typology school you're most familiar with, or which typology school you're coming from, which typology theories you're most familiar with. So yeah, I guess I'll get started. So first off, what do I mean by INFJ? Function-wise, I'm using personality hacker definitions. Personality hacker is a small business that does personality typing and has a podcast too. So yeah, if you're interested in learning more about their definition of the functions, you can check out their podcast on a bunch of platforms, just called Personality Hacker. Yeah, so I'm using their function definitions. The ones I'll be focusing on primarily are the ones that are used by INFJs, which are Introverted Intuition, Extraverted Feeling, Introverted Thinking, and Extraverted Sensation, though not necessarily in that order, which I'll explain later. So I'm going to be talking about INFJs, or myself as an INFJ, using cognitive function oscillations. So I'm not going to be focused just on, or even primarily on, the functions themselves isolated, because the way I've been able to track this stuff better is by looking at the functions interacting, or talking, or going back and forth, or oscillating. Yeah, so that's just two functions working together. That's what an oscillation is. And to give an example of what I'm going to call these things, let me see if this is clear or not. Nope, not yet. There we go. Is it reverse? Of course it's reverse. Well, put this video up to a mirror and then, yeah, and then watch it like that. It might be reverse only from my perspective. But if it's not, then I guess it looked reverse to me because of maybe the way that the video formatting goes. But maybe it's not. Who knows? I'll see when I look at this video when I'm done with it. But yeah, what I was trying to show you, in case that wasn't clear, is you got like this diamond, I guess you could say, with NI at the top, SE at the bottom, and FE and TI on the sides. What that creates is an oscillation between introverted thinking and introverted intuition on one top of the diamond, one top side of the diamond, and you have another oscillation between introverted intuition and extroverted feeling on the other top side of the diamond. The oscillations between extroverted sensing and introverted thinking and extroverted sensing and extroverted feeling are on the lower sides of the diamond. So those ones are less, prominent, less common. The ones I'm going to be talking about are obviously, or somewhat obviously, the INT. I call the introverted thinking, introverted intuition oscillation INT, and I call the introverted intuition, extroverted feeling oscillation NFJ. So I'll be focusing on describing the INT and NFJ oscillations and how they come up in my own experience. So with INT, that's, like I said, it's introverted thinking and introverted intuition. And like I said, I'm using personality hacker definition, so I got to talk about kind of what they call each of these functions and what they mean by them. So with introverted intuition, they describe this function a couple different ways, but that might be explained by something I'll get into later. They call it this cognitive function perspectives, and they just say that it's like you're switching perspectives into other people's minds. You're switching into other people's perspectives. You're seeing how other people see things. That's one way to describe it, but that's not the whole picture. They also describe it as kind of running simulations in your head, or simulating reality in your own mind. But what they really describe it as, like in a sentence, is watching your own mind form patterns. So that's the definition I'll be focusing on, at least for the INT oscillation. Denzel Mensa also describes it. He's familiar with personality hacker. He has a couple videos on NI. And he describes it commonly as metacognition, which I definitely agree with, because what I'm seeing with myself with this function, myself using this function, is that I'm watching my mind form patterns is pretty close. I'm definitely watching my mind work. I think that might be a better way to say it for me. But yeah, that's kind of how it comes up for me. I'm very introspective, and I'm not introspective in the feeling sense, but introspective in just watching my mind work and trying. I mean, it's typology. It's like that's kind of what typology is for a lot of people. I would assume is that you're trying to understand your own mind, forming patterns as you watch it, and you're trying to say, okay, well, are these functions the ones that are going on in my mind, or are these functions the ones that are going on in my mind? So that's kind of a brief overview of NI. TI, they call that function accuracy. They say it's asking the question, what makes sense? And they describe it as kind of like defracting your own mental code, looking at your own mind for errors and trying to correct those errors and rectify those misconceptions you may have about anything, depending on, what TI is working with. Yeah, they say that like very high TI users are skeptical of their own thoughts, which I can definitely agree with. I've become so skeptical in the past that I've like doubted like very basic presuppositions about just basic reality, and that can get pretty intense sometimes. So it's something to look out for, I guess, if you're a high TI user. Don't have much to say about like how to combat it exactly, but the way I combat it, which I guess this is a good segue, is kind of with NI, because they're kind of going in opposite directions. The NI is trying to construct some sort of informational framework or system, and TI is kind of trying to deconstruct it. And I understand like that this isn't necessarily how everybody conceptualizes the functions, but like I said, I mean, this is what's worked for me. I'm using the personality hacker definitions because, like I said, that's what worked for me. And so what I'm constantly doing in my own head is that I'm kind of watching my mind form patterns. I'm forming an interpretation of my own mental processes. I'm saying, oh, this is NI. And then the TI will go like, wait, is it NI? Is it really this? Are we sure about this? How do we know it's not this? What about that? What about this? And all these other things that may potentially deconstruct it. It doesn't always get deconstructed, but it can be. And when it gets deconstructed, I'm like, oh, well, I guess that idea wasn't that good. Alternatively, it can not get deconstructed and it kind of stays, at least for a while, until like I find something else wrong with it, potentially. But it's kind of that going back and forth between like, what about this? No, that doesn't make sense. What about this interpretation? Maybe I'm an INFJ. No, that doesn't really make sense. Maybe I'm an ISTP. Well, maybe not, because maybe this, and that. It's kind of what it looks like for me. That's the INT oscillation, in my own experience. So the NFJ oscillation, I look at that one as social simulation, and I already described the NI function from personality actor's perspective. They call the FE function harmony, and they describe it as asking the question, what gets people's needs met, which is kind of close to how I'm seeing it, but it's a bit more kind of. They also describe it this way that I'm seeing it as well. The way I'm seeing, they also describe it as the way I'm seeing it as well, which is this kind of like social mechanisms or social processes, social interactions, social simulations. I think what happens when you combine it with NI. So I guess what that looks like for me is I'll and this one is not as prevalent. If I had to say like order, I'd say I'm probably more INT than NFJ, potentially permanently or at least right now. Just because I spend a much more time trying to understand myself and breaking down and deconstructing those understandings to make them better than I do trying to simulate social processes or actions. It's not social in terms of like what is friendship. It's like, oh, if this person goes, this person does this, what happens there? Or like if I was to talk to this person, what would that conversation be like? That's how it is a lot. I'm simulating conversations or arguments with people in my head. A lot of the times about typology, but sometimes about other stuff. So I guess a thing to comment on is that I thought for a long time that these two definitions of NI, the one that you get that's about kind of like metacognition and looking at your own mind forming patterns, and the one about simulating socially, were like not socially but just running simulations of reality, were kind of incompatible because they weren't really doing the same thing. I thought that for a while, and now I'm kind of reconsidering it, which is part of the reason I'm making this video. Because I can see this guy, Jordan Peterson, they call him like a intellectual, whatever that means. I mean, he's smart, but intellectual is, I guess, a weird term. Because everybody's intellectual to an extent. But anyway, he has a lot of NI, and you can see he's a psychologist, and he also is into like mythology and stories people tell and how that reflects people's kind of essential nature. And that's a lot of NI because you're looking at psychology, like how the mind works, but you're also looking at like, okay, how do people's simulated versions of reality actually prepare them or help them in life? Like the stories and people tell and the myths that are passed down throughout generations, how does that really allow people to survive and thrive in the world? So that's kind of how I can look at him and say, oh, that's NI, both versions of it, and I guess they're occurring in the same person. So maybe this stuff is, these two definitions are not incompatible. And I think the reason they are kind of seemingly contradictory or different is because one, I think, is more common with introverted function oscillations, and the other is more common with judging function oscillations. So I'd say the introverted functions are, in my definitions, I'd say the introverted functions are obviously SI, NI, TI, and FI, and I'd say the judging functions, though, are SI, NI, FE, and TE. I'm not saying those are rational functions. I'm saying that the TE, FE, TI, and FI are rational functions. But I'm saying that that's just what I'm calling them, that group of four. And I think that when you get NI combined with either TE or FE, yeah, it's going to be more about simulation, either like maybe social or technological. I'm not too sure about NTJ or NITI, but I think that might be the case. Yeah, and I already kind of said, like I said, NFJ is a lot less common, but the real reason that it's NFJ as opposed to, because if you look at that diagram, which, like if I am INT up here with NI and TI, and you draw the lines down, you got, I said NITI, so SE, FE. And then if you look at this bottom part here, that's SE, FE, which is kind of, those are opposite. So I can say, okay, I can say INT over ESF. And then if I look at the side, just like, okay, then the next decision I have to make is STP over NF or NFJ. And I'm seeing, it's not just that I'm seeing INT, period, it's that I'm seeing INT over ESF. And that I'm seeing, which I don't really understand that well, ESF, because I don't think I do it that much. But there's nothing that really looks like anything that would be like sensation, which is how Personality Hacker describes SE, and harmony, which is how they describe FE, which I think I forgot to mention. Yeah, I don't really know. There's so much NI and TI that one's kind of obvious. The second oscillation is less obvious, but it's still kind of apparent because there's not a lot of STP stuff going on. I think that would be kind of like Sherlock Holmes type stuff to an extent. I think you could also maybe do it with science, but like it's looking at like the sensory world and like interpreting it rigorously and correctly to the best of your ability. And so that's kind of like what Sherlock Holmes does, at least in the BBC version of the show. I think other versions where it's just looking at sensory information, drawing accurate conclusions about it. And like being very, very insightful about the sense. He's like also like he's noticing. No, this is like specific, I think, to the BBC version, because in that version he's like has this magnifying glass out, or he's noticing things a lot. And I'm just specifically talking about that type of process when you're like rigorously investigating your environment for like impersonal, metric, objective information, thinking information, I guess. So yeah, that's INT and NFJ. I think what kind of happens when you start using these functions is that you are kind of refining them against each other. They're like two knives or two knives, I guess, in a kitchen with a chef kind of sharpening them like this. Like this one gets sharper against this one. Oh no, that's not how it works at all. It's not a knife against a knife. It's a knife against some whatever wedding stone, whatever it is. So that's a bad example. But I guess a better example might be like two people competing against each other, and they challenge each other, and because of that, they get better at whatever they're challenging each other over. So I think that's kind of what's happening with my NI and my TI, because since I've kind of gotten into typology and started doing this stuff a lot more, those functions, capacities of, I think, or my capacity at least to think critically about stuff, TI, has really gone through the roof. I think my NI is not really necessarily ability-wise, but my knowledge of typology, I guess, and my knowledge of my own psychology through the lens of typology has also gone through the roof. And it's only been because I've been forming these conclusions that I've been like, wait, no, but the conclusions get better, and the questions get better, and the conclusions get better, and the questions get better to the extent that they keep on improving each other in a self-perpetuating way. As far as, I guess, personal development or self-development goes from this, I think the next step would, for me, potentially, if I'm right about any of this, is that I would go into developing my NFJ side, which I guess would be running more social simulations, but also getting out there in the social world and maybe trying to like implement some of these ideas and theories in for other people and with other people, and yeah, I guess that type of stuff, that general type of thing. So yeah, I guess that's the video. Yeah, if you liked it, I guess subscribe. If you didn't like it, you can subscribe as well, just to be weird. Thanks.